Hi guys, Anna Robert here, and welcome to another episode of Dramatic Readings and Personal Stories. And today we are going to be reading Felicity's Surprise, A Christmas Story. It's the third book in the Felicity's series, at least the old way that the books were structured. American Girl recently restructured the books, so it's only 3 books, and they're thicker, and they have less pictures, so I'll have to look in comparing them one day. But let's get on with the dramatic reading. Chapter 1. An Invitation to the Palace. Felicity ran along the frozen paths as if she were running towards Christmas. Then, quick, she turned sideways and slid, slick as a fish, across the smooth stretch of ice. "Try sliding," she called back to her sister Nan. "It's fast." "I'm going to do it again." Nan grinned, but she shook her head. "We shouldn't slide, Lissy. It isn't proper," she said. "And anyway, you know we promised Mother we wouldn't play. We said we'd come straight home after we cut enough holly to fill our baskets." "Very well," said Felicity cheerfully. She knew Nan was right, as usual. Besides, she had already spotted more clear patches of ice ahead, so she ran and slid and ran and slid, while Nan trotted along behind her, carefully picking up the holly sprigs that fell out of Felicity's basket. "Mother! William!" called Felicity as she and Nan burst into the house. "Come see the holly we've cut. 'Tis ever so full of berries." Mrs. Merriman and little William hurried to greet the girls. "Look at all the holly," said William. "A lot and a lot." Mrs. Merriman smiled. "My 2 Christmas sprites," she said. "You have done a fine job. The holly is perfect. Now I can work Christmas magic on the house. But look at you. Your noses are as red and as cold as the holly berries. Go sit yourselves by the fire. Lissy, take your shoes off first. Don't track that muddy slush into the parlor." She scooped up William with one arm and the 2 holly baskets with the other. Later, you can help me decorate. It'll be a fine surprise for your father and then." Just then, they heard a polite knock on the door. "Oh, Lissy," said Mrs. Merriman, "my hands are full. Do please answer the door." "Yes, Mother," said Felicity. The floor was slippery, and she slid a little as she hurried to the door. When she opened, she stepped back in surprise. "Goodness!" she gasped. There stood a very gently dressed man. He bowed to Mrs. Merriman. "Good day, ma'am," he said. "Do I have the honor of addressing the wife of Mr. Edward Merriman?" Felicity's mother nodded. The man held out a letter. "This is for you, madam," he said. Mrs. Merriman quickly put William and the holly baskets down and took the letter. "Thank you," she said as the man left. "Good day to you." Felicity, Nan, and William crowded close to Mother as she untied the red ribbon around and opened the letter. "Why, Lissy!" she exclaimed. "Why, Lissy!" she exclaimed. "It is from Lady Dunmore, the royal governor's wife." It's an invitation for you. Me? Gasped Felicity. Just listen, said Mrs. Merriman. She cleared her throat and read the invitation. Lady Dunmore presents her compliments to Mrs. Merriman and requests the favor of her daughter Felicity's attendance at a dancing lesson at the palace on Saturday, January 7 at 4 o'clock.
Oh, Lissy, sighed Nan. You're so lucky.
Mother handed the invitation to Felicity. She read it, but she could hardly believe the message written in curlicues and fancy script. She was invited to the royal governor's palace. The palace was one of the fanciest, most elegant place in Williamsburg. Many times she'd peek through the iron gates in the high brick wall around it. And now she was invited to come inside as a guest. Felicity was speechless. The room was so quiet, they all jumped when they heard more knocking at the door. Whatever now? Laughed Mrs. Merriman. I shouldn't be surprised if it is King George himself. But it was Felicity's friend Elizabeth, waving an invitation just like Felicity's. Oh, you got yours too, she exclaimed. Her brown eyes were bright with excitement. Isn't it wonderful? Both of us invited to the palace. Won't it be grand? A dance lesson isn't like a school lesson. There will be music and lovely food and everyone wearing beautiful clothes. This dance lesson will be almost like a ball.
A ball? Said Nan, wide-eyed.
Elizabeth rattled on. My mother says our teacher, Miss Manderley, arranged for us to be invited. Miss Manderley knows the dancing master who teaches the governor's children. She asked him to invite you, me, and my sister Annabelle. Aren't you excited? Yes, laughed Felicity. I think I must be in a dream. The cold will wake you up from your dream, smiled Mrs. Manderley. Put your shoes back on, Lissy. Go to the store and show the invitation to your father. You must ask his permission to go to the dancing lessons. Hurry now. Dancing lesson. Hurry now. Felicity pulled her shoes back on. Can you come to the store with me, Elizabeth? She asked. No, I'd best not, Elizabeth answered. My mother doesn't like me to be out in the cold. She's certain I'll catch a fever. The two girls shared a look that said, Aren't our mothers silly, always worried about fevers and such? Then Elizabeth left for home. Felicity gave no thought to the cold as she stepped out into the twilight. There was a happy feeling in the city of Williamsburg that evening. Windows and many of the houses and shops were trimmed inside the holiday greenery as if they were dressed up for a very special occasion. Some wore necklaces of ivy, others had fans of pine or garlands of holly leaves. Christmastide was Felicity's favorite time of the year. It was the season of celebrations, pretty decorations, and many visitors, and this Christmas promised to be the most wonderful ever. This Christmas, Felicity was invited to the palace. Felicity held her invitation safe under her cloak and hurried toward her father's store. The store was empty of customers, though it was not yet closing time. In November, Mr. Merriman had stopped selling tea in his store to show that he was against the tax the king had put on the tea. Since then, the store was never very busy. People who agreed with the king had stopped shopping there. Felicity stepped into the shadowy store lit with a few flickering candles. She called out, "Hello? Hello?" "Hello yourself," answered a cheery voice. It was Ben, Mr. Merriman's apprentice. He was up on a ladder, dusting high shelves. He grinned down at Felicity. "This is a fine surprise," he said. "Have you come for a whistling lesson?" "Not this time," laughed Felicity. "Where's Father?" In his counting room," said Ben. "What's happened?" "Oh, nothing," said Felicity airily. "Only the very finest thing ever in the world." "And what might that be?" laughed Ben. But Felicity did not answer him, because she saw her father coming. "Father, look!" she cried, as she rushed towards him, waving the invitation. "Elizabeth and Annabelle and I have been invited to the palace." "To the palace!" Mr. Merriman exclaimed. He opened the invitation and held it near the candle. Ben climbed down the ladder and came to take a look too. "May I go, Father? Elizabeth says it will be almost like a ball," said Felicity, placing her hand on his arm. "Oh, please say I can go." Well, I, her father began. "Lissy!" Ben burst out before Mr. Merriman could finish. "How can you even consider it? How could you possibly go to the governor's place? How could you smile at the governor and drink his punch as if you're the best of friends? How could you?" "I'm not angry at the governor," Felicity said hotly. "You should be," said Ben. "You know Governor Dunmore represents the king here in Virginia. You know the king and the governor have treated us colonists badly." "Well," said Felicity, "I suppose so, but—" Ben didn't listen. "If you go to this dance lesson, you'll be surrounded by loyalists," he said. "You'll be dancing with children of the very same people who have snubbed us and refused to shop at your father's store ever since we stopped selling tea." Ben shook his head. "Don't you see, Lissy? You can't go. You can't." Felicity felt plunged in gloom. She understood everything Ben was saying, but she still wanted to go to the dance lesson. She looked at her father. Is it wrong for me to go to the palace, Father?" she asked. Mr. Merriman looked down into Felicity's sad face. "Lissy, my dear," he said, "I think it is wrong when adults' arguments make children unhappy. The invitation is kind. The governor and his lady are parents just as I am. They want their children to be happy, especially at Christmas tide. Christmas is not a time for anger. It is a time for friendliness and good spirit and merriment too." "So you say she should go, sir?" asked Ben. He sounded surprised. Indeed, yes, I do. I do think Felicity should go to the governor's palace, answered Mr. Merriman, and she should dance with the governor's children and their friends, because our children can dance together. Then perhaps we adults can settle our differences without fighting. Felicity smiled at her father.
"Oh, thank you, Father," she said. "I did so hope you would say I could go." Mr. Merriman smiled too. "Christmas is the time our hopes and peace and happiness should come true," he said. Felicity looked at Ben. She hoped Father had made him think that it was right for her to go to the dance lesson, but Ben was frowning. Felicity knew she had disappointed him. "Ben," she began, "it's Christmas." Ben turned sharply and walked away out of the candlelight. Chapter 2. Sugar Cakes and Christmas Hopes. Cheerful sunlight shone through the windows into the kitchen. Felicity and Elizabeth were having a merry, messy time baking Shrewsbury cakes. Elizabeth was beating an egg and rosewater together in a bowl. Felicity had unwrapped the blue paper from the sugar loaf and was scraping off a cup of sugar. 5 days till Christmas," said Felicity, "and then 13 days till we go to the palace. It seems such a terribly long time to wait." "Yes," agreed Elizabeth. She added a pinch of nutmeg to the bowl. I think about the dance lesson all the time." Felicity spooned the sugar and some butter into Elizabeth's bowl. "When you lived in England, did you ever go to a dance lesson as fancy as this one is going to be?" she asked. "Oh, no," said Elizabeth. "Never anything as grand as this. Mother says it is such a special occasion. Annabelle and I will ride to the palace in a carriage. We shall each have a footman to escort us right up to the palace door. Who will escort you, Lissy?" "I don't know," said Felicity. "Most likely my father will." Elizabeth grinned. "I have a fine idea," she said. Ben could escort you to the palace. That would make Annabelle green with envy." Elizabeth's snobby older sister Annabelle was sweet on Ben. The girls had shared many a giggle over the way Annabelle fluttered her eyelashes at Ben, trying to make him notice her. So Elizabeth looked surprised when Felicity frowned and said sharply, No, Ben will not escort me to the palace." "But why not?" asked Elizabeth. "He's your friend." Felicity thumped the dough hard with the rolling pin. "Ben does not think I should go to the dance lesson at the palace at all," she said. "He is angry at the governor and the loyalists. He thinks I should be angry too." "Oh," said Elizabeth softly. Elizabeth's parents were loyalists. Her father was friendly with the governor. "But my father said the governor and his lady were kind to invite me, and that I should go," said Felicity. "He said Christmas is the time when our true hopes for peace and happiness should come true." "Well, that's a good thing," said Elizabeth. She sounded relieved. "Because it would be terrible if you couldn't go.
I wouldn't even like the dance lesson if you were not there." "Don't worry," said Felicity with a grin. I'll be there, I promise." She wiped her floury hands on her apron. "Now then," she asked, which cake cutter do you want to use first? The star, the moon, the heart, or the clover?" "Oh, the star," said Elizabeth. "I want to use the Christmas star first." That afternoon, Felicity brought a pretty basket of Shrewsbury cakes she and Elizabeth had made 2 lessons at Miss Manderley's house. "Such lovely cakes," said Miss Manderley. "Thank you, Felicity." "Elizabeth and I made them," said Felicity. "We wanted to thank you for our invitations to the dance lesson. I never dreamed I would be invited to the palace. 'Tis a great honor." "I'm glad you are pleased," said Miss Manderley. "I know you young ladies will do honor to your parents and to my instructions." Do you suppose we will be presented to the governor and Lady Dunmore?" asked Elizabeth. "Will we be introduced to them?" "Perhaps," said Miss Manderley. "Well," said Annabel in a snooty voice, "if we are introduced, the governor and Lady Dunmore will know who Elizabeth and I are. They know our father. When they hear our last name, they will know we are from a family of loyalists." Governor and Lady Dunmore may know of my father too," thought Felicity. "When they hear my last name, they will know I am not from a family of loyalists. Maybe they won't like me." She felt a little nervous. "The governor and his lady will care more about your manners than your name," said Miss Manderley. "We must practice making a curtsy so that you will make a good impression if you are introduced." Miss Manderley had taught the girls to make a curtsy in order to show their respect when they met someone important. Now Felicity stood with Annabel and Elizabeth to practice. Miss Manderley reminded them of the movements. "Stand with your back straight," said Miss Manderley as she watched them. "Put one foot slightly in front of the other. Your head should be bowed and tilted to the side a bit. Eyes looking down, Annabel. 'Tis rude to stare boldly. Now sink down, slowly, and I say softly, 'My lord, my lady,' and then rise. Quite good. But Felicity, don't sink so low. Then you will not wobble. You don't want to fall in a heap at the governor's feet." "No, Miss Manderley," said Felicity. "Oh," tittered Annabel. "Can you imagine what an embarrassment it would be to fall?" She looked at Felicity out of the corner of her eye. "I have heard that the dance master is very strict." She prattled on. "He struck 2 girls because they made mistakes in the dance. And once he scolded a young man sharply because his manner was not quite correct.
"That's enough, Annabelle," said Miss Manderly. "You will all dance beautifully, especially if you practice between now and the day of the dance lesson." She sat at the spinet. "Let us begin our dance practice now. Then none of you need worry." But Felicity was worried. She knew she was not good at dancing, and today she was worse than usual. She even stepped on Elizabeth's toe. What if she stepped on the toe of one of the governor's sons? Soon Felicity was so busy worrying she lost track of the dance entirely. Elizabeth tried to help her by whispering instructions to her. "Point your toe," Elizabeth whispered. She counted the steps for Felicity in a soft voice. Step on 1. Sink down on 2. Step 3, 4, 5. Sink down on 6. Now backwards." But Felicity was red-faced and confused. She just couldn't get back in step. It seemed like hours before Miss Manderly said dance practice was over, and they could all go. As they were walking home, Felicity said to Elizabeth, "I was so excited about going to the palace, I forgot the invitation was for a dance lesson. If we were going to run races or ride horses, then I know I would do well. But I am terrible at dancing." "Silly old Annabelle made you nervous today, with all her talk about the strict dance master," Elizabeth said calmly. "You'll do fine at the palace." "No, I won't!" exclaimed Felicity. She turned to her friend. "Oh, Elizabeth," she said desperately, "I want to go to the dance lesson at the palace more than anything in the world, but the truth is, I am afraid." "Afraid?" said Elizabeth. "Why, Felicity, you're the bravest girl I know." Felicity shook her head. "Not this time," she said. "I'm afraid I will look like a fool." "You will not look like a fool," said Elizabeth loyally. "You will look beautiful." "I can imagine it. You will make a curtsy perfectly. The governor and his lady will be charmed, and you will dance like a dream." Your gown will be all shiny in the candlelight. Your petticoats will whirl around you, and everyone will say, "Who is that graceful and elegant young lady?" Felicity grinned. When Elizabeth described the scene, she could almost see herself looking elegant at the palace. "What are you going to wear?" asked Elizabeth. The question brought Felicity back down to earth. "Oh," she said, "I hadn't thought about that. I'll wear my brown silk gown, I suppose." "The one you wear to church every Sunday?" Elizabeth asked. "Yes," said Felicity. "It's my best." "Oh, yes, of course," said Elizabeth quickly. "That gown always looks fine." "You will be comfortable, too, because it's not so awfully fancy. And you are used to wearing it, because it is not new." "Are you going to wear a new gown?" Felicity asked. No, said Elizabeth. "It's not new. Well, it is new to me." It is one of Annabelle's old silk gowns. My mother is making a new stomacher for it and trimming it with lace. It sounds most elegant, said Felicity wistfully. Elizabeth shrugged as if she wanted Felicity to think she did not care about clothes. My mother and Annabelle say that Lady Dunmore is the most fashionable lady in all the colonies, she said. They are making a fuss about the gowns. I don't know. Clothes are so I don't think clothes are so terribly important. That is what Elizabeth said, but Felicity could tell she did not really mean it. Felicity knew Elizabeth thought it was very important to wear a wonderful gown to the palace. Felicity did not usually pay much attention to clothes, but now she began to think Elizabeth was absolutely right. If I had a beautiful new gown, I wouldn't be nervous, said Felicity. Then I would dance well. I would not make any mistakes if I had a new gown. Everything would be perfect. Elizabeth asked, Do you think you might have one if you asked your mother? I don't think so, said Felicity sadly. My mother is so busy just now getting ready for Christmas, and she and my father are worried about money. There hasn't been much business at the store of late. Oh, said Elizabeth. She was quiet. Then she said, Well, you might just ask. Remember what your father said about hopes coming true at Christmastide? Perhaps, said Felicity. Perhaps, Felicity thought. Asking for a new gown just now would be selfish. But she could not help hoping for one. Chapter 3. Tidings of Comfort and Joy. Next morning, Mrs. Merriman said, Felicity, come along with me. I'm going to the apothecary to get medicine for my cough. We can stop by the miller on the way home. Perhaps we can find some trim or lace to spruce up your old silk gown for the dance lesson at the palace. Would you fancy that? Yes, Mother, said Felicity. She tried to sound pleased, but she was thinking, even with new trim, I will still look like a little brown field mouse. Felicity trailed along with her mother from shop to shop. She was thinking so hard about asking for a new gown. She only half heard the apothecary and her mother chatting. Mrs. Merriman, said Mr. Galt, the apothecary, I am concerned about your cough. It should not linger for weeks as it has. I shall give you garlic syrup and some licorice lozenges. But you must rest. Thank you, Mr. Galt, said Mrs. Merriman. I'll have plenty of time to rest after Christmas. 'Tis such a happy, busy time now. Mr. Galt shook his head. I fear your cough will turn into something more serious if you do not take care, he said. Mind you, wrap up well. 'Tis frightfully cold. Aye, said Mrs. Merriman. The cold cuts straight to the bones, straight to my bones. She coughed as she turned to go. Come along, Lizzie, she said. Good day, Mr. Galt. I wish you joy of the season. Felicity and her mother hurried to the miller's shop. Usually, Felicity was not very interested in the pretty shop full of finery for ladies and gentlemen. Never before had Felicity paid attention to the feathers and fans, flowery bonnets, fancy shoes, purses, laces, and trims. But today, Felicity studied the shelves. Perhaps there is something here that could make my old brown gown beautiful, she thought. Perhaps there is something magic here. And then Felicity saw the doll. The doll was standing on the shelf, holding a bouquet of tiny silk flowers. She had black painted hair and a rosy pink cheeks, and an excited expression. "Look at me," she seemed to say. Felicity stared. The doll's gown was made of a blue silk. It was the bluest blue there ever was. Bluer than the sky, bluer than the sea, a blue so bright it lit up the shop. The neck and the shelves of the gown were trimmed with a frill of lace as white and as delicate as snowflakes. It was the most beautiful gown Felicity had ever seen. Oh, if only I could go to the palace in a gown like that, thought Felicity. She was so lost in her daydream, she was surprised when she felt her mother's hand on her shoulder. Mother stared at the beautiful doll. She was caught by the doll's magic, too. "Isn't her gown perfect?" sighed Felicity. "Aye," said Mrs. Merriman. "But you surprise me, Felicity. I've never known you to care about gowns and such before. I've never been invited to the palace before." Felicity burst out. I've never needed a beautiful gown before." "Ah," said Mrs. Merriman. "I understand." The miller took the doll out of the case and handed it to Felicity with a smile. "I'm quite proud of that gown, she said. "I made it for the doll myself. I copied the pattern from what I saw Lady Dunmore wearing at church. It is the very latest style from England." She held the doll's gown up to Felicity's cheek. "That blue would look lovely with Felicity's pretty red hair, Mrs. Merriman." "Yes, indeed it would," said Mother. "But I have the bolt of blue silk right here," said the miller, "and I have made a lady-sized pattern for the gown. It would take only a bit of adjusting to make the pattern fit Felicity." Felicity looked at her mother with a face full of longing. Suddenly Mrs. Merriman smiled. "You shall have the beautiful blue gown, Missy, my dear," she said. "I will make it for you myself." "Oh, thank you, Mother," Felicity exclaimed. "Thank you." She smiled up at her mother and hugged the pretty doll. "Your father will say I've been foolish," laughed Mother. "But after all, it is Christmas, and it's the first gown you've ever wanted. Besides, how many times is it a young lady is invited to the governor's palace? We will
will show everyone in Williamsburg how proud we are of our Lizzie. You will look as fashionable as Lady Dunmore herself." Quickly the miller wrapped the blue silk in a tiny parcel. "I know you are a fine needlewoman, Mrs. Merriman," she said, "but if you have any trouble, do please ask me for help. The finished work may be a bit hard." Mrs. Merriman looked a little worried. "Oh dear," she said. She tried to stifle a cough with her handkerchief. "I'll help you, Mother," Felicity burst out. "At least, I'll try."